I watched the color drain from Chloe's face, a shade of pale that matched her expensive silk dress, while the rest of the restaurant went deathly silent. My son David just stared at his steak like he was hoping it would swallow him whole. It was the rehearsal dinner for a wedding that cost more than my first 3 houses combined, and Chloe had just announced to 60 people that I was selling my life's work to foot the bill. She thought she'd backed me into a corner, that I'd be too embarrassed to say no in front of her high society friends. She didn't realize that after 50 years of cutting wood, I knew exactly how to handle a knot that refused to give. But to understand why that moment was so sweet, and why the silence that followed was the loudest sound I've ever heard, I need to take you back to the beginning. I've owned Miller's Custom Woodworking since 1974. I built that shop with my own 2 hands on a 3-acre plot of land my father left me. It's not just a building, it's a history book written in sawdust and sweat. I've spent my life there, crafting everything from rocking chairs for newborns to caskets for old friends. I know every creak in the floorboards and every vibration of my 1952 Delta Unisaw. That shop put David through private school, paid for his business degree, and kept a roof over our heads after my wife, Martha, passed away 10 years ago. It's my legacy, and I always planned for it to be David's too. The first crock in the foundation appeared about 2 years ago when David brought Chloe home for the first time. She was a marketing consultant from the city, someone who looked at my calloused, grease-stained hands like they were a contagious disease. We were sitting in my kitchen, a room I'd paneled in solid cherry 20 years prior, and the first thing she said was, "This place has such rustic potential. You could really flip this for a fortune if you cleared out all the junk in the back." The junk she was referring to was $10,000 worth of seasoned black walnut and my grandfather's hand-plane collection. I should have seen the writing on the wall then. I just laughed it off, thinking she was young and didn't know any better. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that David would eventually show her what our family values were actually about. That should have been my wake-up call, but I'm a patient man. I've learned that you can't rush a good finish on a piece of oak, and you can't rush seeing a person's true character. The disrespect didn't stop at comments about my junk. It escalated once the engagement ring was on her finger. Suddenly, I wasn't dad anymore. I was the asset. Every Sunday dinner became a pitch meeting. Chloe would talk about how the artisan woodworking market was dying and how David's career in corporate finance was the future of the family. David, who used to spend his summers helping me sand tabletops, just sat there, nodding along like a pull-string doll. "Arthur," Chloe said during one particularly grueling dinner last November, "we've been looking at venues. We've settled on a villa in Ravello on the Amalfi Coast. It's $15,000 just to secure the date. Total budget is looking like $150,000. I nearly choked on my potatoes. $150,000 for a party? Chloe, that's a down payment on a house. That's a retirement fund. "It's not a party, Arthur. It's a brand launch for our marriage," she said, her voice like ice. "And since you're sitting on 3 acres of prime commercial-zoned land with a dusty old shack on it, we figured it was time you transitioned into a more comfortable lifestyle. You're 70. You shouldn't be inhaling sawdust." I looked at David. "You want me to sell the shop, son?"
He wouldn't look me in the eye. "I just think we need to be realistic about the future, Dad. The land is worth a lot. A developer named Henderson has been calling me. He wants to put a strip mall there. He's offering 7 figures. Think of what that would do for us, for the wedding, for my career, for your retirement." And that's when I realized they didn't see me as their father. They saw me as a bank account with a pulse. Something in me shifted that day. I didn't get angry. I didn't yell. I just took a slow sip of my water and said, "I'll think about it." I didn't say another word about the shop for months, but I started making calls. If that was all, I probably would have let it go with a simple no. But then came the months leading up to the wedding. Chloe and David started treating me like a guest in my own life. They didn't invite me to the tasting. They didn't ask for my input on anything. Instead, Chloe started sending me reminders about the sale. She even had the audacity to bring a surveyor onto my property while I was in the middle of a commission for a local church. I walked out of the shop to find a man in a neon vest driving stakes into my dirt. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just getting the preliminary boundaries for the Henderson acquisition," the man said. The lady told me it was all cleared. I didn't argue with him. I thanked him for his time, walked back inside, and called my lawyer, Saul. I'd known Saul since we played Little League together. I told him exactly what was happening. I told him about the $150,000 Amalfi dream and the strip mall. "They're counting their chickens before they've even bought the eggs, Arthur," Saul told me. "Then let's make sure those eggs never hatch," I replied. I spent the next 2 months getting everything in order. I worked long hours in the shop, but I wasn't woodworking. I was auditing. I went back through 40 years of records. I looked at every penny I'd given David, the $80,000 for his degree, the $20,000 for his first car, the $50,000 I'd put into a starter home fund that he'd already drained for investments. I documented every snide comment, every missed phone call, and every time Chloe had referred to my life's work as the shock. They had no idea what was coming. None of them did. They were so blinded by the shimmer of Italian marble and Mediterranean sunsets that they forgot who actually owned the ground they were standing on. The night of the rehearsal dinner arrived. It was held at the Gilded Anchor, the most expensive restaurant in town. Chloe's parents were there, dripping in jewelry, talking loudly about their country club. David looked uncomfortable in a suit that cost more than my first truck. Chloe was glowing, buzzing from table to table, acting like the queen of a kingdom she hadn't built. I sat at the head table, quiet and patient. I brought a gift, a small hand-carved box made of white oak. Chloe glanced at it and smirked. "Oh, Arthur, how quaint. I hope there's a check inside that matches the size of the box." The room quieted down as the toasts began. Chloe's father stood up, gave a rambling speech about merging legacies, and then Chloe took the microphone. She looked at me with a predatory glint in her eyes. "We have a very special announcement," she said, her voice booming through the speakers. "As many of you know, David and I have big dreams, and we are so incredibly grateful to David's father, Arthur. He's finally seen the light and realized that family comes before old buildings. Arthur has agreed to sell the Miller property to Henderson Development. This sale will not only fund our dream wedding in Ravello, but will also set up a foundation for our future children. To Arthur for finally putting family first." She raised her glass. 60 people stood up, cheering and clapping. David looked at me, a mixture of guilt and relief on his face. He thought I'd folded. He thought the old man had finally given in to the pressure. I waited. I let the applause die down. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I slowly stood up. I didn't need a microphone. A man who has spent 50 years shouting over the roar of a planer knows how to make himself heard. "That's a beautiful sentiment, Chloe," I said, my voice calm and steady. "But there's been a bit of a misunderstanding, or perhaps a lapse in communication." The smirk on Chloe's face didn't disappear yet, but it wavered. "What do you mean, Arthur? We talked about the Henderson deal." "You talked about it," I said. "I listened. And as a man of business, I decided to take a look at the books. I realized that over the last 15 years, I've already given David over $150,000 in direct cash support. Education, cars, housing. It seems I've already paid for this wedding 3 times over." "Dad, not here," David whispered, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "I'm not finished, son," I said, turning my gaze back to Chloe. "As for the shop, I did speak with Mr. Henderson. He's a very persistent man. He offered me $2 million for the land. It was a tempting offer." Chloe's eyes lit up. She actually started to lean forward, her mouth slightly open. "However," I continued, "I decided that the Miller legacy Chloe mentioned is too important to be turned into a strip mall. So yesterday morning, I signed the final paperwork. I've placed the entire 3-acre property, the shop, and the equipment into a perpetual conservation trust. It can never be sold. It can never be developed. It will remain a working craft space and a teaching center for young woodworkers in this county long after I'm gone. I've also transferred the remaining liquid assets from my estate into that trust to ensure its operation." The silence in that room was so heavy you could have carved it with a chisel. Chloe's glass began to shake. You did what?" "I protected the family business," I said, just like you asked. "I put the family legacy first. Of course, this means there is no sale, there is no $150,000 check, and since I've moved my assets into the trust, I'm afraid I won't be able to contribute to the Amalfi trip. But I did bring a gift." I pushed the small oak box across the table. Chloe didn't move. David looked like he was going to vomit. "Open it," I said gently. With trembling fingers, Chloe opened the lid. Inside wasn't a check. It was a set of 4 wooden spoons, beautifully carved and polished. "I made those from a fallen branch of the oak tree in the backyard.
The one David used to climb. I figured you'd need them. Since you'll be staying here this summer instead of going to Italy, you'll likely be doing a lot more cooking at home to save up for your own house. Chloe's mother stood up, her face twisted in rage. This is an insult. You're humiliating them. No, I said, finally letting a bit of the steel show in my voice. I'm educating them. You see, a chair built on a rotten frame will always collapse, and a marriage built on the forced sale of a man's life's work isn't a marriage, it's a heist. I've spent 50 years building things that last. I'd be a poor father if I let my son build his life on a foundation of greed and disrespect. I looked at David. The shop is open on Monday, son. If you want to come by and actually learn how to build something with your own hands, I'd love to have you, but the ATM is closed, forever. I walked out of the Gilded Anchor without looking back. I heard Chloe start to scream, a high, piercing sound that had nothing to do with marketing and everything to do with a spoiled child losing her toy, but I just kept walking.
The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect. The wedding in Italy was canceled. They had a small ceremony at the local courthouse 3 months later. Chloe's parents didn't pay for it either. Apparently, their wealth was mostly credit cards and hot air. David and Chloe are living in a 2-bedroom apartment now. David still works in finance, but he's humbler. He realizes now that the dusty shock was the only thing keeping his lifestyle afloat. As for me, my life has never been better. The Miller Woodworking Trust is thriving. I have 3 apprentices now, local kids who actually want to learn the trade. We're building a library for the elementary school. My son calls every Sunday now. He doesn't ask about the land or the money anymore. He asks about the grain of the wood or how to sharpen a chisel. Last week, he even asked if he could come by on Saturday to help me with the dining table. It's funny how that works. Sometimes you have to take everything away from a person to show them what they actually had. I lost a daughter-in-law's respect that night, but I earned back my son's soul. And in my shop, we call that a fair trade.